who of the speakers is not here yet?
So from the speakers, we don't have Onesmo, Tanzania. We don't have Kani from Nigeria. And the rest we have.
And Michelle
and
from
Michelle Pierre
Seychelles.
from Seychelles.
I will keep an eye on the attendees. If in the meantime they join, I will promote them and let you know that they are here. But for now, they haven't joined.
So we'll start with Nikolai, right?
Yeah, actually, we will start with Nikolai. But first, let's welcome everyone who is following us online. I think we are live on Facebook now. I will ask everyone who is not speaking at the moment to mute their mics, so we make sure that the audio is pretty clear for everyone, including our interpreter and everyone from the tech team and behind the scenes who is supporting this event. I will be sharing my screen very soon and walking through some of the basics of using Zoom and how to make the best out of this event. But at the moment, I will just ask Mika to make it available for me that I can share the screen. Sorry, the option is not working yet. However, I will wait just a minute. I think it's a very easy step to take. So I guess promoting me as a co-host will help in that, Mika. In the meantime, I can just welcome also a very diverse time zone participation from speakers that come from New Zealand to across the whole globe. I think we can start with a good morning for some and good afternoon for others and good evening for also others. Thank you for making the time to be here. And without further ado, I will walk you through the presentation for how to make the best out of this event. We are expecting few more people to join, but for now, let me welcome everyone who is already here to the State of Democracy Elections Under the Pandemic free webinar organized by Civicus. The moderators for today will be myself, Bistram, and Ines, both representing Civicus. Ines will speak a little bit more after I finish. I tend to talk a lot, but believe me, we made a script, so my time of talking will also be limited. We are very happy to host this event, especially because it's a part of a series of events that will be happening in the next weeks and months. Before we dive into the content, a few technical aspects. If you don't speak English or you feel more comfortable to listen to the content in Spanish, we have this event in 2 languages. Please make sure that in the lower bar of Zoom, you are able to choose the language in which you want to listen to, and the interpreter will make sure that you cover and understand all the content that is being shared. If you don't want to hear the original audio of the person speaking, please mute original audio. Usually it helps because otherwise the interpreter and the original speaker are actually overlapping in the sound. With that said, I also want to mention that this is a webinar format of an event. So your microphones and videos are off as attendees. You can only see and interact with the speakers and the panelists through a Q&A box, the chat box, as well as some few polls that we organized where you will be able to share your opinion about certain topics related to the topic of today. I think the Q&A box will be busy, and I hope that all of you attending, you will be able to ask as many questions as you wish. We will try to cover all the questions. However, if anything is not verbally covered, we will at least try to type an answer for you. So feel free in the language that is comfortable to you to pose the questions. We are covering Spanish and English officially, so we can definitely understand both of those languages very well. In terms of the speaker view, I wanted to mention something that we've noticed at virtual events. People sometimes only focus on watching the speaker, but you can change that. So whether you want a gallery view or you want to see only the person speaking, you can change that if you're following us on Zoom. On Facebook, however, the live stream is not, it's out of our hands, so you can't really choose anything around the viewing of the speakers. If you are interested in how you can make the best out of this event, I would say the first one is listen actively. We really have a very vibrant lineup of speakers with a lot of different opinions and a lot of experiences from across the globe. I'm sure we can keep your attention in 90 minutes in a very exciting and vibrant way. Also engage by typing. Even now, if you feel comfortable, share in the chat box, hello, where are you coming from? What's your name? We would love to hear from you. And of course, use the time to also post questions or comments. Speakers love that. And in the virtual kind of format of events, it's really important that we connect and make space for sharing a few sentences with each other. I think another important aspect is this event is recorded, also live streamed, and at the end we will share one short question where you can share your feedback, whether you enjoyed this event. Of course, as a follow-up step, you can check out the State of Civil Society Report 2020. I included a link in it. We will also share the link in the chat box. I think Yasminka will be the one sharing some of these links right away during the event. And also join the next event that is happening actually next week on the topic of challenging exclusion and claiming rights. This is again part of the series of events organized to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the State of Civil Society Report that Ines will talk about in just a minute. Before I pass it on to Ines, I just want to share something around the format of this event today. We will have a possibility to post a few statements that we would love to hear the opinion of attendees at this event. So you will be able to agree, disagree, or say it's complicated on 4 kind of not really provocative, but very well thought through statements around elections and the role of civil society. And right after the voting, we will have experts actually commenting on those statements, but also commenting and sharing more of their local realities. After that, we will have probably a minute or maybe sometimes a little bit more to dedicate to questions, either coming from the audience or some additional questions that we as moderators have for our speakers. In this way, we really hope it will be an interesting, inspiring, and empowering experience to be with us today. So with that said, I will just pass it on to Ines. I will not read the event statements now because I think there is no point to it, but I will stop sharing my screen so Ines can share a few words about today. Ines.
Thank you, Bistra. Welcome, everybody. I will only take a couple of minutes just to explain what this is all about. And as Bistra already anticipated, this is the reason why we are here is because in February next year, we will be publishing the 10th edition of our State of Civil Society report. We're really excited about this because we've been working on this for many years, 10 to be more exact. And this report every year analyzes key events and trends that impact on civil society and civil society responses to the major challenges of our times. The report that we do is about civil society, but it's also from civil society and for civil society. And it draws from interviews and other inputs from civil society activists, leaders, and experts. So to feed into this very special edition, we are holding a series of webinars. This is 4 webinar consultations or discussions on several key challenges facing civil society around the world. And the first one is this one that is we are today, and it's about democracy and elections under the pandemic. So we realized that many countries around the world held elections in 2020, and this happened in a very wide variety of contexts and with a lot of different results. And if we analyze these elections, we will know a lot about the state of democracy and the space for civil society in all of these countries. So today we'll have speakers from a variety of countries, from Bolivia to New Zealand, including Belarus, Serbia, and many others. And we expect to have a very lively discussion. So back to Bistra, she will start polling us and we'll begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. So I just wanted to take also the time to just start the poll in a few minutes, but just wanted to also mention that Michel Pierre from Seychelles is also here. Please choose the language channel that you want to listen to and communicate with us. There is English and Spanish language channels available. And for the rest of the speakers, I would really advise you to be online with your video on as well, because it's just easier to communicate and see each other. With that said, I will just start with the first poll, and I will launch it, and we will have 1 minute of time for answering. So launching it right away, and I will read it so the translator can also translate in Spanish. Civil society has a role to play in helping to make elections more free and fair. You can agree with this statement, you can disagree with this statement, and you can say it's complicated. We have 1 minute so far, 6 answers. Waiting for a little bit more, but there is a pretty strong tendency towards one answer at the moment. I will keep it for 15 more seconds and then I will share the results with everyone who is present. Okay, so we have 100% result on agree. So most of the attendees and people who voted agree with the statement that civil society has a role to play in helping to make elections more free and fair. Ines, what do your experts say on this topic?
Well, we'll begin with Nikolai Kvantaliani from the new group in Belarus. And I mean, before asking him a question, I would say if this was an election and we got 100% votes for one candidate, we would say the elections were rigged, right? So luckily this was not an election. Let's speak about the elections then in Belarus. Nikolai, we would like to know what the main problems with the elections in Belarus were and what impact the post-election protests had.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to present a short outline about the situation in
Nikolai,
Belarus.
Sorry, for some reason, at least I can't hear you. Can you mute and unmute again?
Now, can you hear me? 1, 2.
No, we can't hear you for some reason.
And now? Well, if now is better?
No. Julie can hear Nikolai. So maybe, Nikolai, you can join the channel, the English channel. Have you chosen a channel?
No.
In the interpretation?
English. So now is better.
Can
Sorry.
everyone hear?
My apology for these technical moments.
Problem.
So the interesting moment of Belarus, that we recently passed 100 days of the protests. So actually the situation developing already for 3 months or more than 3 months. Frankly speaking, one of the challenge of Belarusian elections was that we have a dictator for last 25 years. In particular, it means that every elections of the president elections, they were frauded by the president. And actually, we didn't expect anything different this time. The only difference, what happened, it's that elections were frauded and we had a lot of more evidence than before. And the way how the government decided to oppress the candidates and then civilians who protested through the not free and fair elections, they brought us to this 100 days of the protests. So what happened before elections? Approximately a few weeks before elections, main candidates, they were accused in a crime case, some criminal, they were accused in some fraud, and the criminal cases were opened against them. So mainly all oppositional candidates a few weeks before president elections were in prison. And then we have these 3 wives of the candidates. Actually, one of the wives, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she was registered on the president position instead of her husband, because at the moment of the last day of registration, the husband was put in the prison. So they start joint campaign to support Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and to run the president elections. And actually, the citizens, they believed in the changes. So a lot of people started to vote or to record the violation on the local polling stations. And finally, we got the day of elections, and the president claimed that he got more than 80%, and reality was a bit different. He probably might have approximately less than 50%. So in any case, it should be the second round. But because he's a dictator, he can't go for it. And just results what happened after. Our colleagues, they prepared the materials that they decided to go to the league in a legal way. So they prepared material that confirmed the fraud of the elections. And you see these files, heavy files that they were brought to the ministry, to this to the committee where it should be prosecutor office, but unfortunately nothing happened later on. And then people came to the strike to protest that elections were not free and fair. And it was first time, it was a lot of people. So it was like 100,000 of people, and they were brutally oppressed by police. So it was more than 6,000 detained, a lot of cases when people were tortured during the detention, and etc. And it's brought, how to say, big not understanding of why the government behaved in this way. And it's brought us to the moment when we have wide protests. So we do have a small group protest of community protests, like on the local level, regional level, in Minsk, a capital of Belarus. And professional strikes like doctors or factory workers, they went on their own strike. So actually we have the country on the strike. And every time when you think that the protest going down, the government behave in a way when it's not acceptable for the society. Recent, it was the citizen who went out to protect the white red flag. It's a flag of the free Belarus. And he was detained, or he was actually kidnapped by people, by strange people in civilians, and he was murdered later on. And unfortunately, officially, the state officials didn't say that it's their fault. They didn't, and actually everyone who was tortured or was repressed during the last 3 months, the police was, it was no investigation of police. And the final shot, it's actually what happened now. We still have a peaceful protest, but unfortunately, the police using brutality and extra force to repress the citizens who is actually not just protesting. They don't do anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. So do we have any questions from Facebook or from the chat? Because if we don't, I do have a question.
Not at the moment, but I would just use this time to also remind everyone to post as many questions. But Ines, go with your questions for now.
Yes, Nikolai, I would like to know, I think many other people will also want to know how the protests adapted to the situation, right? How maybe tactics changed in order to bypass restrictions in response to the repression?
Yeah. Thank you for a good question. We can say that now the protest, it's actually during the entire week, we have different groups who are protesting. And for instance, if previous Sundays, it was the protest on when people gathered on the main square and walked through the city center. And actually it's brought police to be more prepared because you have more or less same road and you can easily block the protesters and peg them and detain them. Last Sunday, we had the local protest. So actually the citizens, they gather on local squares, and it was the same amount, like 100,000 of Belarusians who protested at the last Sunday, but police was disoriented because they were not able to cap all the protests on the local level. Thank you. So it's important to adapt to what police is doing and government is doing.
So one last question. What do you think the way forward is? What can we expect to happen in Belarus? What are the perspectives for democracy in your country?
Thank you for a question. I can say that one of the problems for the current government that they passed the point when it was possible to bring everything back, because their recent behavior towards international community and their own citizens will not allow to remain as in these conditions or continue the authoritarian regime for 10 years. So actually we expect that the government will need to make a decision, and finally in different ways to get rid of the last dictator. And then actually we can start to talk about the development of the country and the civil society and democracy in Belarus.
Thank you very much. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. I would encourage everybody who's listening in to take advantage that we have such an amazing speaker and try to ask any questions you might have. But in the meantime, if we don't have any more questions, then I would say, Vistra, let's move forward. And then we'll get back to Nikolai and Belarus later on.
Yes, definitely, Ines. I think more questions will come as we come closer to the end of the event. So let's open it up to the attendees and participants, and hopefully we get more questions at the end. I will just move on now to the poll statement number 2, if everyone is okay with that. Another chance to vote and another kind of topic that we will touch upon. So launching the poll, and the statement that we are voting on this time is civil society can help overcome polarization and build trust and cooperation after divisive elections. The options are, again, for your answers the same: agree, disagree, or it's complicated. For now, I can tell you also the votes are very divisive, but yeah, let's hear it out. So 1 minute, everyone who is present, please vote. Civil society can help overcome polarization and build trust and cooperation after divisive elections. Agree, disagree, or it's complicated. Ten more seconds. Sharing the result, we have actually small percentage on agree, no percentage on disagree, and the highest percentage on it's complicated. So as a complicated topic, I think, Ines, you can take it away with your experts. Let's see what they have to say.
We'll find out it's really complicated. So we are going to hear to 3 different speakers. We're going to speak about the situation in 3 countries where elections were quite polarized. And the first one is Eleodora Quiroz from the Centro de Estudios y Apoyo al Desarrollo Local, which means Center of Studies and Support for Local Development in Bolivia. I will speak to her in Spanish, so get ready, translators and everybody. Eli, quisiéramos saber si esta elección, si esta elección ha cerrado el ciclo que comenzó con la elección en que Evo Morales fue obligado o tuvo que finalmente renunciar y irse del país. Si esa polarización que se abrió en ese momento se acaba de cerrar con esta última elección. ¿Qué puede hacer acaso la sociedad civil para construir puentes y acercar?
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Aquí en Bolivia es de tarde. Y bueno, las pasadas elecciones del 18 de octubre de esta gestión sí calmó un momento la crisis política que se vivía en el país. Habían sectores muy polarizados entre una oposición y un partido actual que todos querían estar en el gobierno en un determinado momento. Pero sí, las elecciones han calmado eso. Sí ha habido después de las elecciones como que un momento de conflicto social nuevamente, pero ha sido apaciguado, ¿no? Cuando ya asume la presidencia el nuevo gobierno, que es Luis Arce y David Choquehuanca, quienes se les ha dado el voto de confianza para que puedan calmar esta crisis económica y crisis social que estamos llevando todos por el tema de la pandemia, ¿no? Y aquí en Bolivia la crisis no solo viene cuando la pandemia llega al país, sino que viene desde la gestión 2019 con las elecciones fallidas del 20 de octubre, que ha detonado en un conflicto social, sectores polarizados, el oriente y el occidente, y esto ya está apaciguándose. Sí es un reto muy grande para el país que el gobierno y la sociedad misma pueda coordinar con los diferentes sectores para que vivamos todos en armonía y no se vulneren más los derechos de que todo ciudadano boliviano tiene, la que la Constitución los respalda.
Eli, parece que el caso de Bolivia es como una situación ejemplar, ¿no? Donde se logró una salida institucional para una situación de una enorme polarización, que no ocurrió en otros países que han tenido elecciones recientemente, ¿no? Que el caso de Bolivia da la impresión de que se logró que la legitimidad del proceso electoral fuera reconocida y que los resultados no fueran cuestionados, ¿verdad? ¿Qué hizo la sociedad civil qué hicieron las organizaciones, los activistas para asegurarse de que el proceso fuera limpio, que fuera competitivo y que no fuera cuestionado?
Bueno, han habido muchas organizaciones de la sociedad civil que han participado el día de las elecciones haciendo observación electoral. El caso es que aquí en CADL, donde yo trabajo, sí se ha movido un grupo de activistas, jóvenes voluntarios, que estén en los lugares donde se emiten los votos, es decir, los recintos electorales, para que si hubiera alguna irregularidad, se reporte a un sistema y que se pueda presentar en un documento único, ¿no? Que ha sido igual coordinado con la Unión Europea y de internacional. Las y los jóvenes han estado en el conteo de votos en las mesas hasta el último conteo, donde sí se daba evidencia de que los resultados eran similares, pero han sido diferentes, ¿no? Hay ciertos sectores de la sociedad o de donde vivimos que sí apoyaba a un partido político y había otro sector que el voto también era muy fuerte para el otro partido político. Como lo mencionaba, han habido muchas organizaciones aquí en Bolivia que han estado presentes el día de las elecciones haciendo observación electoral y cumpliendo con el control social que todo boliviano lo debe realizar para estar garantizado, ¿no? su voto.
Muchas gracias, Eleodora. Vamos a averiguar a ver si hay alguna pregunta para ti.
At the moment, no questions in the chat box, except for Nikolai, who also took the chance to answer in the chat box as well. Thank you for taking the chance. I think, Ines, we can continue to the next expert or speaker and then see whether something else comes up.
Okay. Yes, I hope we will be able to make some comparisons and just exchange experiences from the different cases. For example, how the polarization was overcome or not in the different cases that we're going to see. So the next speaker is Maya Stojanovic, of Civic Initiatives in the Western Balkans. And their work, Civic Initiatives work, covers several countries in the region. We're going to start by asking her about the elections in Serbia, but we will just keep in mind that there were elections in other Western Balkan countries, and we're going to ask her about them afterwards. Regarding the elections in Serbia, Maya, the first thing we would like to know is why this election was labeled as the most controversial one since democratization 20 years ago. If they were so controversial and so polarized, do you think that implies a process of erosion of democracy?
Well, thank you, Ines. Civic Initiative work in Serbia, but we are part of the network because in the Western Balkans, because we really believe that it's very connected, because we were living under the same system throughout the decades, and actually anything what changes in one country changes in another after a while. So it is very important to see it as a structure that is very, very much mutually connected. Regarding the last elections in Serbia, I would first say two things. First one is that it's not controversial. It was the last democratic elections that we had in 20 years. So, and for us, it's very important in Serbia from the civil society part to say that, because it's actually the European Commission talk and different reports that are trying to be diplomatic and not actually say the real problems in the country. So for us, it was less democratic. And of course, because of that, there is a lot of controversies regarding different things. The second thing, which I was not sure it was mentioned a lot till now, so I would also add this to the question to Nick if he has a chance later on to comment. It was this connection with COVID and the pandemic that we had in a country. In Serbia, it was pretty much linked, in a sense that influenced the elections. It influenced the period before the elections. We also had a very huge protest after the election because the citizens saw that there are some decisions made during the elections or before elections which are made from political reasons, not for the benefit or health of the citizens at that point. So I don't know how was it in different countries, but in Serbia it was pretty much connected, and it might even happen that dealing with the COVID crisis and everything what the state does now, the government does, would actually have the big consequences on their further ruling in the next few years. So. Being back to controversy, there was different issues long before COVID also, which are connected to free elections. There were not free media. So media are very much polarized in a sense that there is a lot of controlled media. Only, I would say, 5 to 10% of the media are being able to report freely about the issues in the country, and they have even less people circulation or the audience if those are electronic TV stations. So there is pressure on the voters by the government party. We saw that even much more in 2017, and now we couldn't find it more because actually it was completely different for the elections. Like, we didn't know as a citizens there were elections going on except the push of the government to go out. And I would say also one of the important things is participation of the state officials during the elections. So from the position of the president of Serbia or from the position of minister, you are being part of the elections as a minister, not as someone who is from the specific party. So there was a lot of issues. They were connected to COVID in a sense that each decision was somehow a balance of is it a democracy more important or the health of the citizens? And I see it as a very, it was completely new for us, and it's still new. And I believe it's new everywhere, of course, on the global level. But it was very hard to actually make a decision how to react to the government's positions or actions, because you were not sure as a civil society, is it better for citizens not to have elections or to have elections? So I would like to hear also others commenting on that, because it was very hard for us. And after the elections, I would just say that the main part of the opposition was boycotting elections. So we now have the whole assembly combined of the government supporting parties, and just 6 actually MPs of 250, which are from minority parties, which is also very strange. We didn't have this kind of dynamics in the parliament for very long. And we had also huge protests for introducing another state of emergency in Serbia, which were very much connected to the government's decision regarding COVID, but also non-democratic ruling before the COVID pandemic. So I would say that we continue with polarization, and I would also be very happy to discuss it a little bit more later. Thank you.
If I can ask you a follow-up question. because I was going to ask, what can civil society do? But I'd rather ask first if civil society offers a unified front in some regard, or all these divisions also, just cut through civil society. It's also divided. It also has all these different. I mean, it's also polarized, as as civil society.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it's a very, we are having within the civil society at this point now the debate about the polarization within the civil society. But there is two things. There is gongos and the governmental organized NGOs, which there is a polarization very, very clear among the original civil society and the ones created by the government to be part of the debates and everything else. But there is also a big struggle and questioning, because there is a recognition that this is an authoritarian regime in different aspects. So the biggest actually debate is, should we cooperate with the government, and do we give a legitimacy to the government if we are cooperating with them, or we are trying to solve something and to actually make some things going a little bit better for the citizens as a whole. So I would say that polarizations is among those two angles. Should we cooperate, or should we say as a civil society unitedly that in a united way that we don't want to cooperate because there is a lot of things in rule of law and democracy going very wrong?
Thank you very much, Maya. So I think we can go to the next speaker, and maybe we will start to have some responses or exchanges, because we're going to speak to Sandra Urquiza from the Carter Center in the US. And well, Sandra we need to acknowledge, she will have a very hard job to do, because she will speak about the election that we've been all speaking and hearing about for a long time now. Sandra, you're welcome. And I will ask you about the US election and about polarization in the US election. On the day after the election, on the 4th of November, the Time magazine said that polarization was the only clear winner of the 2020 election. So our question for you is, why is polarization such a big problem in the US? And what is civil society doing, or what can it do to help overcome polarization?
Hi, Ines. Thank you. And thank you, Vistra, for inviting me to speak with y'all today. And yes, so it is a complicated issue. So first of all, I would like to maybe start off this conversation by saying that although we have different parties in the US system, only two have real weight and representation in Congress and in American politics. So this makes polarization a little more likely to produce or to result in antagonism, because rather than having many choices to dislike from, you only have one. So instead of saying, it will transform the sentiment from saying, I do not agree with this set of policies, to this particular group that embraces this set of policies is my enemy, and it stands against all I stand for. So that's why polarization is also a little more difficult, I think, in the context of the US, and just to frame it that way. It also results, and it's both a cause of a result of different factors. So we have basically two divided groups that have opposite beliefs, that have opposite principles and priorities, and different and opposite maybe understandings of reality. And I wanted to emphasize on that one piece of the different understanding of reality. In the US, for example, you have one group that believes that COVID is a real threat, and that it is a thing, and wants to believe or wants to pursue a scientific approach to a solution to COVID. And then you have another group that thinks that it's mostly been created to maybe curtail on our freedoms and to have control, and interprets the COVID approach as an attack on American freedoms. So when you have two groups that are so just lacking of a common ground, then it is really difficult to try to address the problem because the understanding of reality is completely different. So that's one thing that I also wanted to emphasize on. And I think that related to that is something that Maja was talking about, which is media and information and disinformation. And also I wanted to bring up selective information. So for example, in the media landscape and social media, once you click on one type of news, then the social media will start automatically feeding you that type of news. So it not only results in I am only seeing one perspective, but each of these two groups, because the reality is in the United States, we mostly have two, then they start kind of just shifting farther and farther and far away from each other. So that's also one important thing of why polarization is so it's so difficult, in at least in the U.S. context. And you know, and information, disinformation, mostly selective information, is something that definitely aggravates the issue of polarized views and groups. So just to maybe like bring it up all together, having two large parties dominating politics with opposite understandings of reality, with opposite principles and opposite priorities, makes it all like very difficult to try to find common ground. And that means that it will be difficult to find common solutions to different or a wide variety of problems. So as far as what is it that we can do as civil society? Well, there are different things that we can do. One of them is try to bring back those groups to a common understanding of reality. At least if all of us see a triangle, we'll be able to deal with a triangle. It's not like someone sees a square and somebody else sees a circle. So that's one of the things. And how do we do this? For example, one of the initiatives that we had at the Carter Center was we recently had a recount exercise in Georgia, where instead of sampling a few thousand ballots to make the inference that the elections were legitimate and that the count was great, it worked well, we had to conduct a whole recount of the states. So what we did at the Carter Center is we deployed 68 observers in 24 different counties in the state of Georgia, and that covered about 60% of the total votes cast in the state. When you have organizations that do this kind of work and then say issue a preliminary statement, so we did that, you're offering nonpartisan information out in the public, and that's a way to approach these things. So you want to, especially because there's so much information out there and the information is usually aligned with, or people interpret it as if it's aligned with one party or the other, then CSOs can really focus on information, disinformation. At least in this social media landscape, we have information from all over the place. We don't know to believe if it's true or what's true or what not. So just as CSOs focusing on that, we found that that's one of the paths to maybe start building a conversation between two different groups in the US. Basically anything, and we strongly believe that any project that will propel conversations between two, or at least here, and two different groups will work towards building a bridge among really a vastly polarized society. We are still trying to figure out if the current president doesn't want to go, but then you have one group that says that he won't legitimately, and you have 50% almost of the country who really believes this. So we are lacking at this moment that dialogue, that space for conversation. We have two groups of people who are like really just perceiving the other as the other, and to be able to maybe start bridging that gap, CSOs can really emphasize on creating the space for one, impartial information, and two, dialogue. I think that once, and we think that once you create that, then you can disagree on many different aspects, but we have to go back to the basics. We have to go back to having a common understanding of reality and a common understanding of what really is that we disagree on. Yeah, and with that,
Sandra,
I'll give it back to Vista.
Yeah, I will have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We give 5 minutes to the speakers, and I'm sorry to be very rough on the time, but it's, you know, equity, equality is one of the values we cherish. So we give the same spotlight. But I think Ines has a few more questions, so you will have the chance to talk more. I just wanted to be mindful of the time.
Yeah, sorry, I was done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Yeah, I actually do have a question from a colleague who just sent me a question through Skype. So I will ask you the question. It is about disinformation and the role of social media, and because you know conspiracy theories and disinformation have been around for decades, for a long time, for as long as we can remember, but they never spread as fast as they do right now, thanks to social media, right? So it seems sometimes that it's an uphill battle, and you know, fix a hole and then you get like 100 more. So and how can what should civil society do to get social media companies to do more to combat this information? Or is that the way to go? Is what civil society should be doing?
That's a great question, and there are actually some initiatives. You know, I work on our election observation missions of ARM. There are some projects that actually use platforms that do a fact check on different social media platforms. So, you know, Facebook, Twitter, you have CrowdTangle, which will identify some hate speech or will identify violence or violent speech. So there's definitely tools and there are projects that CSOs are being engaged in when they use these tools to definitely analyze and fact check if there's something that's information or flag it as information or misinformation. And yes, we definitely have a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of work to be done in that realm.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, we've seen Twitter fact checking the U.S. president, right? So that that would be an example.
Yeah, he will take away the title officially after January 20th.
Thank you very much, Vistra. I think we can go to the next polling statement.
Great, thank you, Sandra and Ines and all the others. I will go through the third statement now, and this is, I can promise you, a very interesting one. I'm launching the poll with the statement, when progressive candidates win elections, it's good news for civil society. Again, you have 3 options to answer: agree, disagree, or it's complicated. We have 1 minute, already several votes, actually a very strong kind of choice of one option, but now it's getting a little bit diversified. 30 more seconds. So when progressive candidates win elections, it's a good news for civil society. Agree, disagree, or it's complicated. 15 more seconds. Please, everyone who is able to vote and is with us on Zoom, use this opportunity to vote so we can also inspire the next round of speakers and experts talking about this. Okay, end poll and sharing results. We have 29% on agree, 0% on disagree, and 71% on it's complicated. So as you can tell, we are actually moving from pretty less complicated statement to more and more complicated statements. So Ines, take it away and let's tackle this topic with your next round of speakers.
Thank you, Vistra. We have 2 speakers from the same country. So we are going to listen to different perspectives on this issue of progressive candidates winning elections and whether dialogue is possible, because we've heard from the previous speakers about situations in which dialogue, political conversation has become nearly impossible. And so we are going to hear about New Zealand, which to outside observers seem to be some sort of paradise. So is that real? Is that what is going on? Our first speaker is Anne Tolley, former member of parliament for the National Party in New Zealand. And we are going to ask her, from her experience, what was the role of civil society during the pre-election And the hustings process, and she's going to explain what that is. Was civil society restricted? Was it enabled? Did citizen participation improve in the democratic process? And if not, what needs to be done so it does improve?
Good morning, kia ora tātou. So first of all, the hustings process is simply another name for the election process, where a candidate is out and about talking to people, trying to garner votes. And as Inez said, I've been a politician in New Zealand in both local, regional and central government for over 30 years. So I've had a bit of experience in elections. And New Zealand has a long history of free and fair elections. And this 2020 election was no different in that respect, but it was different in the way that many of the other speakers have referred to, in that it was dominated by the COVID pandemic. And that changed things, particularly for government and for civil society, I believe. And to explain that, we need to go back to what happened when the pandemic hit and the government's actions to control the pandemic. And New Zealand's an isolated island, so we had a huge advantage over countries that share land boundaries and where movement in and out is difficult. And our government, from a very early stage in 2020, took control, used a high trust model with very simple messaging to explain to people that they had to stay at home, they had to keep themselves and others in their community safe, and by doing that, we could beat this virus. And there were daily briefings of the media from both the Director General of Health and the Prime Minister, wide use of social media, which got directly into people's homes. And so a very high trust model with this community of 5 million, which is the population of New Zealand, was extremely successful, and as the results show. So I've represented for 15 years an electorate that contains many very isolated small communities. It's a population that is 50-50 Maori, our native people, and 50% European. And from an election point of view, as I was retiring, we would normally have selected a candidate in January, February. Because of the restrictions, a candidate couldn't be selected right through until end of June for a September election. So you could say in one way, and that was typical of a number for a number of candidates from various parties, not just my party, around the country, because you couldn't have meetings of more than 10 people, or you couldn't get a good selection process using technology as we are, because there are small isolated communities. Not everyone has access to good internet coverage, and so you couldn't have a fair process. So by comparison with somewhere like Belarus or some of those that we've heard, it was moderate. The risks were moderate, but there are risks just the same that we need to think about. So as we came into the election, we had further lockdowns, which then prevented any meetings of any great size, and even walkabouts through malls were risky in some particular parts of the country. The election was totally focused on COVID. It's probably the most policy-free election New Zealand has ever seen, because it was all about how to maintain our almost COVID-free environment from our communities. And that does have risks for civil society. It does stop civil society from taking part in normal democratic processes when the government is so highly trusted, has complete autonomy now for the first time in over 20 years, we have a one-party dominating our government and complete control. And that has risks, but from a COVID perspective, it has been extremely successful. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Anne. Well, this is a very interesting insight about how the quality of democratic debate degrades when there is an issue such as COVID, and there's no, I mean, you don't see policy alternatives because nobody's speaking about anything else. So that must have been a very important obstacle for the democratic process. But you spoke also about trust, and I think that's a very interesting concept in light of the experiences that we heard of in the previous segment. So if you have any ideas of how civil society is working to foster that trust, or if anything that civil society should do to create that trust.
Look, I mean, that's a very good question. And we have a very extraordinary politician as our Prime Minister, as I think, you know, the world is aware. She has huge communication skills, and she has, with the Director General of Health, developed that huge trust in them from a health perspective. And I think the lady from Serbia was talking about that dilemma for civil society. What's more important, that we challenge the government over, you know, big borrowing and big spending and all those sorts of things that we would normally challenge the government over, or do we put our health ahead of all of that, because that's the most important thing. And I think civil society has come down on the health side. And most politicians have come down on the health side, and as a result, we saw quite a phenomenal election result, where New Zealanders have trusted their Prime Minister and their Director General of Health more than any other politician. So I don't know the answer to your question. I think it's one of the dilemmas that we have to think about, because you can see that this could be used in quite nefarious ways by some very clever people. And I was really interested in Sandra's discussions about the polarization and fake news, which in the US is just such a huge issue for civil society in particular to try and grasp.
Well, thank you for raising that comparison, because yes, that's one of the things that comes to mind immediately when comparing these two cases, right? That it's common sense in New Zealand, but in the US, health guidelines were highly politicized. So the fact that they were not in New Zealand, that is something to look at, right? But thank you very much, and we're going to go to Julie Haggie from Transparency International in New Zealand, and we'll ask her about, maybe we've heard about, you know, the caution side of the election process in New Zealand, and, you know, what we need to be aware or careful with. And now we would like to hear about the positive change that the election may have brought, or if it didn't bring much change, maybe how it consolidated positive change in terms of women's leadership, opportunities for civil society, or any other issues that you could think of. So Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ines. Yeah, I think I can talk about the positive things. I've also echoed a lot of what Anne was saying. It was an interesting election. We had more people voting than we had the previous election. We had more people voting ahead of the election. So advanced voting was about 60% of people had already voted before election day, which did really squeeze the amount of space for a public debate. We ended up with a single party rather than a coalition government, which we've had for a number of years. And but within that single party, there's a huge amount of diversity, many more, as we're now, the leading party's now got 50%, well, I think there's now 50% of women in parliament. There's a lot more diversity in LGBTQ communities, ethnicity, has increased, and so on. So that's a good thing. A lot of people have come in now who hadn't been in Parliament before, so there's a lot of new MPs. That can be good, and that's good, but they've got to get their legs under the table. So I think from civil society's point of view, it had both good and bad. There was a little bit of a digital divide for people engaging. So I saw a lot of online events being run by civil society, and we certainly ran ours. We ran a session on polarization. We ran sessions on educating, a whole lot of questions for parliamentarians and trying to get them out. But unless you're able to actually access those, there was a large chunk of the population who really didn't have that connection with that. So, and they're the ones who need to have the connection on the ground with the local politician. And I think that's the heart of democracy is on the ground. So I think our challenge is now to get that back, and for all the parties is to get that back moving, get politics back moving on the ground at regional and local, and people to get to, as soon as they can, get out and see and have meetings. We had a meeting and we managed to have a pre-election meeting. We didn't know it was going to go. It was right up to the last day. We had no idea. And then all of a sudden we were allowed to have it. And the politicians there, they said it was basically one of the only events they'd been able to get to that had more than sort of 40 people at it, because even when it was opened up, people weren't going to those events because they were worried about COVID. So that's the yeah. So we sort of saw a slide down in terms of our political makeup. You know, going back to one party system is not ideal, because you get more debate at the table and more tensions when you've got a coalition. But I think yeah, women, it was great. Diversity, it was great. And I think civil society had to kind of step up and take a range where they could. They had to step up and be the voices and encouraging the voices online. So at least where that happened, there were things like Town Council, which was an online forum that happened every week. Some of those became a little echo chamber-like, I think, but yeah, I think I think a lot of what Anne said is really true about the dangers now of people using this kind of setup to manage and control the outcome. I think it's a really interesting conversation. We did a piece of research during the process on online political campaigning, and I'll put the link in there because it's sort of and we also have an online, our webinar on polarization is also available online. So I'll put the link to that. That's about all I've got to say. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That was very, very interesting. So what I was thinking is maybe what we can learn from what you've just told us is that what was quite an experiment, right? Because we were forced to conduct politics in a very different way as from the usual due to the pandemic. And so if we had any idea at some point that the democracy of the future would be some, technological, high-tech, virtual thing, we need to recalibrate, right? Because maybe the democracy of the future is more similar to the democracy of the ancient Greeks and the local contact and the going back to the grassroots level. So it could be a very interesting experience that you're doing in New Zealand. If there's anything you want to say about that, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, well, we're all starting our own steps, we know everybody's got their own challenges in their countries, and we're all equally watching other countries to see how it's going. It's so interesting to see what's happening I mean, terrible for Belarus, but so interesting to see people struggling and struggling with their democracies and really trying to do the very best. It's just great to watch. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So Vistra, back to you and to our next polling statement.
Thank you, Ines. In the meantime, I just want to send another kind reminder to everyone who has any questions or comments. Feel free to type them in or share with us on Facebook channels. So far, we have a lot of hearts and likes on Facebook live stream, and I can share some of the hellos and greetings from Cameroon, Asia, as well as Europe. More questions are expected to come hopefully in the last half an hour or 25 minutes that we have ahead of us for this event. So I will now launch the fourth statement for this event. And this one goes as follows. Following electoral change, there is room for civil society to ensure that real change happens. You have again 3 options: agree, disagree, and it's complicated. 1 minute of time for everyone to answer. I will repeat it one more time so the translator can also repeat it for the Spanish speakers. Following electoral change, there is room for civil society to ensure that real change happens. Agree, disagree, or it's complicated. We even have an answer to this poll in the chat box by Rob. Rob, please make sure to vote. We want to capture this in a way of a poll. And 15 more seconds. Again, we are kind of leaning towards one option. No, now it's getting a little bit more interesting. Okay, 1 minute is out. Sharing the results, we have 33% on agree, 0% on disagree, and 67% on it's complicated. So the complexity still there, still increasing. Ines, let's hear from you and the experts that we have assigned for this statement.
Okay, so you guessed we are going to talk about elections where there was electoral change, right? So where somebody who was unexpected or who wasn't in power for a long time was elected. And the first speaker is Michel Pierre from the Citizens Engagement Platform in Seychelles. And he's going to talk about the experience in his country where something quite unusual happened in these past elections. The ruling party was defeated. And so what we would like to know is, how did it happen? What were the factors behind this defeat? How was civil society involved, if in any way? And if there are new opportunities for civil society opening as a result of the electoral change? Michel?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this session. Yes, after 43 years of the United Social Party in power, they were defeated in the October election. I must say the main reason is that people wanted a change. After 43 years in power, people wanted to change the current regime and have a new government with new people, new ideas, new way of doing things. And for the past 4 years, it has been President Faure who was the president of the country. And he came up with a new style of leadership. Firstly, when he was inaugurated president, he stepped down from the leadership of the party, stating that he was willing to work for all the people and trying to put politics out of government. And he started to introduce a lot of things in the country, the Anti-Corruption Commission, the Truth and National Reconciliation Commission. And as you may know, Seychelles went into a small coup d'etat in 1977. And we spent 30 years in a one-party state. And during those time, people were deported, some were intimidated, and there was a lot of frustration amongst the people at that time. And then when we got the independence, and after the introduction of multi-party system, people started to create their own political party and started to participate in the democratic process. And you know, all these frustration and the things that went into the 13 years of one-party state, I think it has been in the heart of people. And during the reconciliation, National Truth and Reconciliation session that were broadcast live on TV, people felt these frustrated feelings. People saw how people were treated, especially the young people. And you know, these were the main reason why people say, you know, after 43 years in power, I think it's time for a change. It's time to bring some new blood into the country, into the government system. And I think people were free. The media were free to participate in the election. It was really the real democratic process in Seychelles. And It was well contested, the election. About 88% people participate in the election and vote. But it went very well. It was calm. It was peaceful. People were observing the different health protocol in place, wearing masks, keeping social distances, and it was very nice process. But you know, with all the with events, there's always some weaknesses, because the electoral commission were very new. They were recently the committee was recently constituted. The secretariat, the CEO of the Electoral Commission, she was very new with her team. So there were some loopholes, some weaknesses in the process, but it did not affect the results. So it was very free and people participate actively. And now civil society, with the former government, with the former president, we had an MOU signed so that we can participate, we can bring our issues on the table and discuss with government. And with the new president coming into power, we had a meeting with him 2 weeks ago. And he assured us that we will get the support of government. We will work together, especially in this crisis, economic crisis that we are facing. I mean, it's a global crisis. And we agreed that we will work together for the benefit of the country. And we have came up with a few programs to assist with the health ministry, so that citizens can be continuously educated about the COVID-19, about the different health protocol we put in place. And it's been a very fruitful process with regards to election. And we have not witnessed a transfer of power in Seychelles since 1977, and we do not have it in the law, but it was a very nice transfer of power. The former president and the new president, they had meetings, they discussed how the process will be, and it was a very peaceful process, a very peaceful passing of power. And they agreed that the new president agreed that he was going to create an office for the former president, so that he can continue to contribute his expertise, his knowledge, since he's been in government for a long time, and see how best he can also help in bringing the country forward. So that's basically about the election in Seychelles.
Thank you, Michel. So one follow-up question. So is that continuity a good or a bad thing? Because well, I would ask you to respond to the polling statement. Is there room for civil society to ensure that that the change, electoral change, is actual change in policies and not just in faces in power? Is there any room for civil society to play a role there?
Well, yes. There's space for civil society, because we've been the watchdog, and we've been freely taking our position and consulting publics about the different changes that is happening in Seychelles. It has been the case for since the former government was there, and it will continue. And we are the watchdog of how things are going. And Seychelles being a very small country, and with only 95,000 people, with only one state media and one private media, TV, I'm talking about TV now, and a few radio stations. So we do make our voice heard, and we do take position, and we are the watchdog of the different changes that is happening. And the government is open, and they are willing, and they want us to tell them if anything is wrong, if there's anything that they are doing. Perhaps we can also contribute towards the different policies or law that they're trying to be implemented now. And we have the space to contribute.
Thank you very much, Michel. I think where are we right on time? Let's try to go to our next speaker. So our next and last speaker is going to be Maya Stojanovic again, because as I said when I introduced her, her Civic Initiatives works in several countries in the Western Balkans, and there's been elections in more than Serbia. There's been elections also in Montenegro and in Bosnia. And in some of these countries, we've seen political change as a result of the election. So we have a couple questions for Maya about Montenegro and Bosnia. I'm gonna ask you the questions about the two countries, and then you can choose how much to ask to respond about each. So in the case of Montenegro, we saw that a very small difference in votes made a huge difference in government, because it ended the 30-year rule of the ruling party. So our question about this change is how unexpected was this, and what are the implications of this change? In the case of Bosnia, what we are seeing is a country with a very complex governance, and we're seeing sort of contradictory trends. It seems to be like politics is going in one direction at the national level, but also in a different direction at the local level in certain cities. So we want to hear more about the different trends that seem to be developing. So Maya, we will test your ability to summarize your ideas. Thank you.
Especially on the things which are complicated. So I will try to draw some lines which are maybe common for the countries, but also connected to our discussion now to maybe put some concrete examples on some things, because it's very hard to explain everything. So in Montenegro, as you mentioned, there is a switch of power, and there is, after 30 years, we have now new people on power. Was that expected? I would not say so, because we are in the region, all of us, very used to having this one party in power that nobody believed they can change anymore, or anybody else can come. But we had a very, very different opposition, different among themselves. So we had different groups of opposition, left and right, and also the central one or the moderate one, who came together or decided to actually not come together, but decided not to fight among themselves and decided to go to elections. So it was somehow a united front of the opposition. But I would mention one sentence that actually was said by the guy who is now the appointed to set up the new government. When the elections finished, he said the good things comes to the ones who wait. So I would say this is pretty much similar in the whole region, that opposition is not very active. and it was very strange to me that he actually said it after the elections. There is no somehow proactive, programmatic proposal to the citizens. So actually, when we do have changes in the government, they somehow come because the ruling party cannot sustain themselves anymore, and there is some huge changes in a sense, as maybe I would hope COVID would do in a sense of actually people reaction to what the government is doing. But in Montenegro, we also had a law on religious communities, and they tried to arrange this system of property of the church and everything else. So it was big reaction from the right wing, I would say, and nationalistic parts of the society, also with the support of Serbia, because it was Serb Orthodox Church that were leading the protests there. So in that sense, it was a huge step that we all could think it will finish with the change of the government. But at this point, I would just sum up the results. I would say that there is a non-partisan government, if I can say that, in a sense that only one person, which was from this more liberal leftist part of the opposition, is a minister. All the others appointed or nominated are actually non-partisan people. So they are not coming from the party. So I would say this could be maybe a important change to see how that will, what kind of consequences that will have in a sense of politics here and everything. It's still a big question mark of the connection to the right-wing movements and the church, which has during 90s here very a wrong way of dealing with the conflicts. I would say very, very slowly, but Actually, what we saw in Bosnia, which is also they had a change in capital cities and some capital cities on Republika Srpska and Federation, and there is also some other cities where the government is changed. So it can be a first step to change in the future. But I would say in both countries there is a lot of young people being involved as a new faces. So it was not it was not very often here that we have a new faces, especially young people leading the or coming up as a opposition leader in different ways. So I would say there is two things. That one is we as a civil society, what we need to do in the region as such, or wherever I would say, but we need to monitor the government, and I would say we are the keeper of democracy. We saw now, and I think it's very obvious that any parties or the current government cannot make democracy sustainable, in a sense that each step that they choose, each action can lead in one or the other direction. So we had institutions here. We had after 2000, we had a democratic party in government, and we had issues after that. So we had the erosion of the democracy. We had different problems. So I do think in Montenegro also, and in these steps in Bosnia and we in Serbia in some way, we need to keep civil society on the toes, and we need to make sure that any step which is problematic, we somehow draw our red lines. So we know where our red lines are, and we need to make sure that the citizens know when the government or any political party crosses that red lines. And I do think we need a global discussion on these red lines, because it's a pretty similar situation in a lot of countries. There is right-wing movements, there is attack, I would say, on the democracy, there is social networks that I would also argue the change, like the potential of social networks going in both directions. So we need to see what is the right way for actually a society regrouping and acting in a way that we can really assure that there is no erosion in a different spheres of the society when it comes to the democracy, rule of law, and human rights especially. I didn't get the stop, but...
Thank you, Maya. No, that was great. Well, you put out there a question that it would be great for your fellow speakers to interact around, and you just what are our red lines of civil society, and what can we do to improve the quality of democracy, citizen participation, civic space, what the role of civil society would be, and who are the actors that that hold the key to this. And in your case, you mentioned young people, which is great. So maybe I would like to just leave it open for other speakers to react to what you've said, or to what anybody else has said, and if you want to have an exchange among yourselves, that would be great.
Usually these are the moments when everyone doesn't know, should I unmute myself, should I mute myself, but you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself. We will manage to organize quite well. I think Nikolai is already reacting, so let's give it a try there. Maya, you can go next because I saw you unmuted as well. And let's start with that.
Yeah, it's quite complicated to react because it was a lot of different perspective and different experience from different countries who was present. I like this point from the Niger regarding the 43 years of the one ruling party and this slow change for democratic state. And my reflection is that when you stay too long in dictatorship, it's usually you used to it. But because everything is changes, I do have a hope for a change, for a better change in our countries. Thank you. More action will coming soon.
Maya, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to break the ice, but now, yeah. But I forgot to say one thing. It's for me interesting because in Montenegro we had a very good election night, in a sense that actually the government which lost the party which lost the election just said, okay, we lost, and that there is a new day tomorrow. And we had a different situation in our perspective in US, for example, because there is still ongoing issues with the Trump recognizing the elections results and everything else. So it's just one thing that we need to think about. It's not actually how long they stay in power. It's actually the ways they rule also can define how they go. And I would say even in Montenegro, we had authoritarian in a pretty similar way as controlling the media and everything else, but it's a little bit different when they are coming from not on the way of the populism. In Montenegro, it was completely different. They came during the 90s, they changed very soon during the 90s, the pro-European democratic values and everything else. So it was different when they left than others. I don't think we will have the same situation in Serbia, and I think it can be shown during the power of those people how actually the transition could lead. And I do think that the civil society also has a part in that, to actually predict that and maybe in this polarization do something.
Thank you, Maya. I saw Julie as well, unmuted. Julie, go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to reflect from our point of view, though we're really proud of how things went in New Zealand. It was a real shock to show how vulnerable you can be. All you need is something to destabilize, and it just makes democracy so fragile. It was a real lesson, I think, for our New Zealanders, and how important that trust and respect that you may have built over a long time, and how that can have currency at those times. Luckily for us, that did, and we had good leadership on all sides of the political debate. So I just think of it. It's just reinforced how fragile it is, and how easy it is for it to shift suddenly. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Anyone else from the other speakers that haven't spoken? Anne, please go ahead.
Thank you. I do want to raise the role of social media, and I think we underestimate that at our peril. And it can be used for good, and I think, but someone said it earlier on, and I just can't remember which speaker, but it does tend to allow people to continue talking in their own circles, and following one track of discussion and one point of view, and it can be extremely cruel to those who want to disagree. And you know, that intimidation and that bullying, and I think that's one of our civil society's greatest threats, is that the power of that social media. And you know, we've seen it here locally, where people have been really absolutely pilloried on social media, to the extent that they have then developed mental health issues. And you want to say to them, just turn it off, don't read it, you know, but it is quite addictive, and more and more young people are using their devices and are using social media as a way of contact, and it is a very artificial way of contact. And I posted a little thing in the chat box saying, you know, we underestimate the social contact that human beings need at our peril, because that, you know, we have developed to convey a whole lot by our gestures, by our facial expressions, by our touch, and COVID has made us use all this technology, and it has many advantages, and social media it allows us to connect in a whole range of different ways with people that before was extremely expensive and difficult to talk to, but at the same time, it can be used for evil purposes. And we haven't really come to grips with how that can affect democracy over a long period of time.
Thank you, Anne, for raising such important topic. Actually, I saw many of us nodding during your speech. I would now like to move to Ellie, who also showed interest to speak. Please go ahead.
Sí, como mencionaban, creo que los principales actores para la construcción de la democracia somos nosotros mismos. El hecho de cómo organizarnos, de cómo manifestarnos, y como mencionaban, creo que las redes sociales también son una herramienta básica para que los jóvenes nos podamos organizar, podamos compartir cierta información, pero siempre verificando la procedencia, ¿no? Y también el cuidado de esto, porque así como hablamos de democracia, también hay mucha vulneración a los derechos mediante las redes sociales. Y en lo particular en Bolivia, pese a las restricciones que hubo por la pandemia, se vivió una fiesta democrática. Muchas personas adultas mayores que no era necesario que vayan a votar, votaron, y esto significa un compromiso que la sociedad tiene para cambiar el sistema de gobierno que uno tiene, ¿no? Entonces el cambio esencial es de nosotros, desde donde nosotros trabajamos, desde donde nosotros conversamos con nuestros vecinos, amigos, familiares, organizaciones, es donde allí se construye una sociedad democrática y un país democrático. Gracias.
Thank you, Ellie, for raising that also aspect and building up on forward on the social media and the importance. Thank you very much. And now last we have Sandra. I think our speaker from Seychelles had to disconnect because it was too late for him to stay with us. But we have Sandra to close kind of the last words from the speakers, and then we will close the event with a short question and a thank you. Sandra, go ahead.
Thank you, Vistra, and thank you everyone really for such insightful conversation today. Yes, so I am going to piggyback on what Anne spoke about. Actually, this was one of the talking points that I skipped, but in just thinking of going back to the basics or going back to a common understanding of things, it will be a little bit of a challenge to maybe have that kind of face-to-face interaction during the times of COVID, but hopefully we will be able to find a solution soon where we will go back and have those kinds of conversations. I definitely mostly super agree with Anne and just trying to go back to the humanity of conversations. There's definitely a sense of emboldening in the internet where you're sitting behind the screen and just trying to type things out. You would come across a little bit more aggressive than you would usually be in person and more like, you know, brave to say things. So hopefully in this time of misinformation, disinformation, selective information, we will also try to remember to conduct our activities with our humane sense and our human sense of interaction face to face, and I think that will be one of our best tools moving forward, along with the virtual. But then we also have to make sure that we complement both to be able to build understanding really and try to overcome this huge challenge that we have in this century. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I think that was really beautiful wrap-up words. In order to really close this event in time, I'm sorry we are 5 minutes late. I will just launch a poll question, which is a very, very simple one. And also panelists can this time vote. Overall, was this event a good use of your time? Agree, disagree, or somewhat? I really would love to hear short answers from everyone who is present. And I will use this chance to also thank everyone who joined. First of all, the attendees and everyone who followed us on social media. Secondly, everyone who made this possible, this event possible. So there is a lot of people in the behind the scenes, from comms department to tech department, Yasminka, Ines, of course, thank you very much for being with us today. And lastly, and most importantly, the speakers who brought an amazing content, a lot of honesty, a lot of, I would say, radical transparency, a lot of messages we need to digest. And I would just want to thank you very much for connecting with us. And I hope that we will get the chance to have this vibrant type of discussions again in the future. Let's stay connected, although virtually only, and stay safe and healthy as much as you can. All the best from the Civicus team.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.